That's the way it is. So.
Look, people spent a lot of time building pyramids. Building pyramids was considered worthwhile employment. Who's to say what's worthwhile? Yeah, go ahead.
Let me explain Basil's point, how it is. And he has a very valid point. The structuralist position, which I think has some validity, is that South Africa's productive capacity of the things that people currently want.
The way we measure production.
Yes, I understand that all those night watchmen who could be doing services and all that too.
Right.
But the stuff that are currently wanted is at full employment. They don't have more manufacturing capacity. If you go and you want more electric power and you're in gold, you work for goldfields, there's no more power available.
Right.
They need to build more power plants.
If they want to do more of that stuff.
That's. I'm just trying to give an example. No, hold on. You've had the microphone for a long time.
I still got it. Athens did. Athens did very well without electricity.
Okay, but now.
Rome took a while to be built, but it was built without bulldozers, without the IMF, and without any.
And indeed, we couldn't build the Pantheon today. We don't know how to.
All right.
Now, the point is this: if you start to create ELR jobs, and you do create these night watchman positions and so on, you will pay them. They will then want the sorts of things like televisions and meals and food and so on. And South Africa doesn't have the capacity to produce it. There's two things.
They already want that stuff. They already want that stuff.
They do, I know.
Okay.
What I'm going to get to is the problem here of inflation and politics. That money will be chasing after those goods. Some of it will leak, of course. A lot of it will leak into the current account, and the trade deficit in South Africa is bad already. You, of course, say that let the current account, let the exchange rate just depreciate. That will, of course, cause more inflation. What you're going to be doing is changing the relative price of things.
I just said it, go ahead.
As a result of this chasing after more electricity, because the folks who get these ELR jobs want electricity in their huts in Soweto, that will have profound political effects in the sense that those who were employed will now find themselves having a decrease in the standard of living and will be very opposed to it. Right. And they are the politically powerful.
Right.
In addition, I've talked about sort of how you're going to have these effects through the open economy effect. Now, that is a huge political problem that just recognize, and I call it an economic problem because it's a real world problem. You've got a trade-off now between creating these night watchman jobs and changing relative prices in a way that will be very disturbing to many in society and who will oppose it.
Okay, so let me address
so this is a political problem that until society values full employment enough to accept some reduction, those who are employed may have to accept some reduction in their own standard of living, because as far as I'm concerned, I don't want one of your assistants, even if you offer it to me for free.
I got it.
I haven't got the time to manage.
Okay, well, I'll withdraw my offer. Okay, so, all right. Here's the, anybody else doesn't want their personal assistant? Not a problem.
Are you offering
this is a voluntary. You offer it to anybody who wants it. You don't force it. This is not slavery.
Is there anything else on the choice list? Anything else on offer?
Okay, so look, the cost, the real cost is always the incremental actual increase in consumption. Is this person going to eat more because they have a job? Are they going to be driving more? Are they going to be, watching more electricity, more television? And, not to violate Lerner's law, but there is some argument that says, are they going to be, right now, you probably eat less, you probably need less health care, you probably have fewer family issues, you probably have fewer broken windows during political demonstrations, So you can argue that, and if the real costs do go up, you say, okay, well, let's look at the actual incomes we're talking about, and it comes out to something like less than 1% of GDP. And you're talking about a place with excess, and I can go through the numbers if you want, but in the US at $10 an hour, you get 10 million people, we're talking like peanuts, okay? So, yes, the answer is qualitatively, yes, it can add to demand, yes, it can eat this. Now, then you have some real benefits on the other side, such as if you can get some useful output, maybe it's worth, feeding them a few extra calories so they can, do that useful output. Now, there's some argument that nobody in the public sector can do any useful output. And, I mean, that's a political decision, and we have our own means of valuing these things. So I'm not going to disagree with any of that. I'm also, and these people are already unemployed, and they are collecting a certain amount of income and doing some real consumption with that income. And so you're looking at incremental differences. The other thing you're looking at is because they are working and they are now a fluid, when aggregate demand does increase, assuming the rest of the economy is, has some productivity increases, or not even productivity increases, develops some, tries to hire more people, okay, for whatever reason, they can then hire these people, and demand constraint isn't really the right word, but what happened in Argentina is that other business expanded and needed to hire people. They were hiring people out of this buffer stock. They wouldn't have been able to hire them before, and so because it's a more fluid buffer stock than unemployment, it actually keeps inflation down and it strengthens the currency. This would be my argument. But now I'm getting a little bit into theory, and I don't mean to argue that, but I can only say I think it's more effective than the unemployment that we're using today, incrementally, and certainly no worse. It's very difficult to make an argument that it's any worse than what we're doing today. And it's very difficult to make an argument that, even though, again, I don't want to violate Lerner's law, but that the money is material. Even if it was, you can go through other reasons where it might be something we want to do. And if you're affecting, and all I'm saying is this discussion, because we're not going to finish this discussion here, I'll talk to you another time. This discussion is not taking place. And if there were 5 Tom Pallies with slightly different political, with your education, with slightly different political views having this discussion, I'm sure things would come out that I hadn't thought of there. And they're all good, and I know that fundamentally this is going to be better than, this is an option that wouldn't be discussed, isn't being discussed because they don't understand the solvency issue. They're worried about the intergenerational transfer issue. They're worrying about whether we have leaving this debt to our children, so that in the year 2020, when we build 20 million cars, we have to send them back to 2008 to pay the debt. Okay, just like today, half of what we build goes to 1945 to pay for World War II. Like, what are they talking about? We're the macroeconomists here, guys. So this whole thing's nuts, right? And so because they've got these, I talked to this guy from Morton, Smetters, you know that guy? And he's got this unfunded liability, $72 trillion. So what about the demand leakages? He goes, well, what are those? Well, maybe that's not enough to have a $72 trillion deficit in 30 years. Maybe it's going to be deflationary because the pension funds are going to have that much. Oh, how's that worth? I said, well, and then he goes, I said, well, operationally, the government's not constrained in its spending. There's no solvency issue to this. He goes, well, you're talking operationally. I'm not talking about that. So, we're like people standing around like this watching this guy going, like, who is it? What is he talking about? And they were financial markets people. He was just dismissed, but he's still out there with all these kinds of things. So what's happened is because there's this assumption that's before any two intellectuals in the economics world start a conversation, the assumption is there are these budget constraints, there are these this and that and the other thing, and so it never gets here. So the conversation you want to have isn't happening anywhere else. And it doesn't really matter whether we resolve this or not. It's not happening between Bernanke and Paulson, okay? And that's where it needs to be happening. And so, number one, we have to understand that it's not, whether it isn't happening. We have, in a sense, failed over the last 10 or 15 years to get it happening at any policy level. Or maybe it's in the process of happening and we haven't got to some kind of what they call a tipping point or something yet. I don't know. Okay, I'm cut off. Thanks very much. And